The cold, unforgiving marble of the courthouse floor seemed to leach the warmth right out of her Louboutin heels. At 8 months pregnant, every step for Georgina. Adler was a deliberate, calculated effort. She was here for one reason: to stand by her husband, the real estate magnate Zach Morgan, during his ridiculous headline-grabbing trial. She was his rock, the mother of his unborn son, the silent, elegant proof of his stability. But as she pushed through the heavy oak doors into the silent waiting courtroom, her world didn't just crack, it exploded. Because there was Zach not looking for her, but turned toward another woman. His hand was on her arm, his body a shield, his expression one of fierce, undeniable protection. And that woman was not just anyone. She was the prosecution's star witness. The Morgan estate in Greenwich, Connecticut, was less a house and more a private kingdom. A sprawling limestone manor, it sat on 50 acres of manicured land that rolled gracefully down to the Long Island Sound. From her sun-drenched breakfast nook, Georgina Adler could watch the sailboats drift by a serene tableau that mirrored the life she believed she was living. At 32, she had everything a woman could supposedly dream of: a brilliant, devastatingly handsome husband in Zach Morgan, a fortune that insulated them from the mundane worries of the world, and a baby boy, their first child, kicking gently beneath her heart. Their love story had been the stuff of magazines, which it frequently was. She, the bright art historian, from a respectable but not wealthy family. He, the self-made titan of New York commercial real estate. He had pursued her with a single-minded intensity that she found intoxicating. He hadn't just bought her things. He had listened to her, championed her career, and made her feel like the absolute center of his universe. When he'd proposed on a private yacht off the coast of Santorini, it felt less like a question and more like a coronation. The first 5 years of their marriage had been an effortless glide. Then came the indictment. It had dropped like a bomb 6 months ago. Federal charges of wire fraud and conspiracy tied to a downtown skyscraper development called the Apex Tower. Zach had been furious, dismissive. "It's a political witch hunt, Gio," he'd explained, his hand resting reassuringly on her growing belly. "My competitors want me out of the game, and they've convinced some ambitious prosecutor to make a name for himself. It's nonsense. It'll all be thrown out." Georgina believed him. How could she not? This was Zach, the man who could bend cities to his will, whose confidence was as solid as the foundations of his buildings. She endured the whispers at charity galas, the thinly veiled pity in the eyes of her friends. She held her head high, a perfect portrait of unwavering loyalty. The press, initially rabid, grew bored with her quiet dignity. The trial, however, was a different beast. It was real, it was public, and it was draining the light from her husband's eyes. He became distant, spending late nights in his study with his lead counsel, Robert Peterson, a man with the predatory stillness of a shark. Zach insisted she stay away from the courthouse. "I don't want you in that circus," he'd said, his voice tight with a stress she'd never heard before. "The stress isn't good for you or the baby. The paparazzi, the questions. It's vile. Please, Gio, stay home. I need to know you're safe here." His concern felt like another layer of his love, a protective cocoon. For the first week of the trial, she complied. She watched the news reports, her stomach twisting at the sight of him striding into the courthouse, his face a grim mask. The prosecution was building its case around a series of falsified loan applications and shell corporations used to inflate the project's value. The key, they claimed, was an inside witness, a former executive from one of his subsidiary companies who had allegedly helped orchestrate the fraud and had now turned state's evidence. The media respecting a court order had not yet named or pictured the witness, but as the second week began, a gnawing unease began to replace her placid faith. Zach's calls became shorter, his explanations vaguer. The strain was breaking him down, and she couldn't bear the thought of him facing it alone. Her place was by his side. It wasn't about the optics. It was about love. He needed to look over at the gallery and see her, his wife, his family, the reason he was fighting. That morning she chose her outfit with the precision of a general preparing for battle, a simple but impeccably tailored navy maternity dress, low heels, her grandmother's pearl earrings. She didn't tell Zach. It would be a surprise, a show of strength. Her driver, a stoic man named Frank, looked concerned as they pulled up a block from the federal courthouse. "Are you sure about this, Mrs. Morgan?" Mr. Morgan was very clear about, "I'm sure Frank," she said, her voice gentle but firm. "He needs me." The media swarm was a chaotic beast of flashing lights and shouted questions. Shielding her belly with her handbag, Georgina pushed through the throng, her security guard clearing a path. The cold air of the building was a relief, the marble floors echoing with the hushed, important sounds of the law. She followed the signs to courtroom 4B, her heart a steady drum of purpose. She was doing the right thing. She was the loyal wife. She paused at the heavy double doors, taking a deep breath to steady her nerves. She smoothed down her dress over the perfect curve of her stomach, feeling her son give a little flutter, as if in encouragement. She was ready. She pushed the door open and stepped inside. The room was packed silent, save for the rustle of papers. Every eye was on the front of the court where the lawyers were assembled. Her eyes found Zach immediately. And that's when the world stopped. He wasn't looking at his lawyer. He wasn't looking at the judge. He was standing near the prosecution's table, his back partially to the gallery. He was speaking in a low, urgent tone to a woman seated there. A stunning woman, with sharp, dark hair and a tailored suit that screamed ambition. One of Zach's hands rested on the back of her chair. The other was on her forearm, his thumb stroking back and forth in a gesture so intimate, so unconsciously familiar, it stole the air from Georgina's lungs. He leaned down his lips, brushing her ear as he whispered something. The woman nodded her own expression, a mixture of fear and resolve. Georgina felt a wave of dizziness. Who was this woman? A junior prosecutor? A paralegal? Then the prosecutor, a stern-looking man named Henderson, stood up. "The people call their next witness to the stand," he announced, his voice booming in the stillness. "Sabrina Valenti." The woman with Zach stood up. As she walked toward the witness box, her eyes swept the gallery and locked with Georgina's for a fleeting, terrifying second. In them, Georgina saw not triumph, but a flicker of something that looked like pity. Zach finally turned his face pale, his eyes wide with panic, as he saw his pregnant wife standing in the doorway, her hand protectively on her belly, her face a mask of dawning horror. The whispers started then, a snake-like hiss that slithered through the courtroom. The reporters in the gallery began scribbling furiously. They all understood what Georgina was just beginning to. This wasn't just a witness. Zach wasn't just talking to her. He was protecting her, his mistress, the woman who was about to testify against him. Time seemed to warp in courtroom 4B. The seconds stretched into an eternity of silent, agonizing revelation. Georgina stood frozen in the doorway, the heavy oak door, a dead weight against her back. The collective gasp of the gallery, the frantic scratching of reporters' pens, the sudden flash of a forbidden cell phone camera, It all faded into a dull, roaring tinnitus in her ears. Her entire focus narrowed to the tableau at the front of the room. Her husband, Zach. His face a canvas of pure, unadulterated panic. And the woman, Sabrina Valenti, now taking her seat in the witness box, refusing to look at anyone. The intimate protective gesture Georgina had witnessed, the hand on the arm, the whispered secrets, wasn't a fleeting moment. It was a language, a history, a betrayal so profound it felt like a physical blow. This was the star witness, the linchpin of the government's case, and her husband had been comforting her, shielding her. A court officer moved toward Georgina. "Ma'am, you need to be seated or exit the courtroom." Her body responded before her mind did. She stumbled backward, pushing out into the marble hallway, her hand flying to her mouth to stifle a sob. The world tilted violently, the cool stone floor seeming to rush up to meet her. Her security guard, Ken, was instantly at her side, his large hand on her elbow steadying her. "Mrs. Morgan, are you all right? Let's get you out of here." She could only nod. Her vision blurred with tears she refused to let fall. Ken guided her through a side exit, away from the piranha swarm of media at the front entrance. But it was too late. A few reporters, sensing a bigger story, had already circled around. "Miss Morgan, what's your reaction to the witness? Did you know your husband was involved with Sabrina Valenti? Are you standing by him?" The questions were brutal, invasive projectiles. Georgina felt her stomach clench a sharp, painful cramp that had nothing to do with her pregnancy. She huddled against Ken's side as he shoved them into the waiting town car. Frank, the driver, took one look at her ashen face in the rearview mirror and pulled away from the curb. Without a word, his movements swift and efficient. The drive back to Greenwich was a silent, suffocating blur. The lush greenery of the Merritt Parkway, usually a comfort, seemed to mock her with its vibrancy. Her gilded cage was waiting, but its golden bars now felt like cold, hard iron. Every memory, every shared laugh, every promise Zach had ever made replayed in her mind, now tainted and grotesque. His insistence she stay away from the trial, was it to protect her from stress, or to prevent her from seeing this? The late nights with his lawyer, were they all about legal strategy, or were some of them about her? When she arrived home, the sprawling mansion felt cavernous and hostile. The scent of fresh lilies arranged by the housekeeper was nauseating. She went straight upstairs to their master suite, the room she had so lovingly decorated in shades of cream and soft blue, and walked into the cavernous closet. On one side hung her bespoke dresses and gowns. On the other, Zach's perfectly tailored suits, rows of them, each one a uniform of his success, and she now realized his deceit. She sank onto the plush ottoman, the fight finally leaving her. The sobs came, then violent, body-racking tremors that shook her from head to toe. She cried for her marriage, for the fool she had been, for the life she thought she had. Most of all, she cried for the innocent child inside her, this little boy who was about to be born into a maelstrom of scandal and lies. Hours later, Zach came home. She heard the front door, his heavy footsteps on the stairs. He found her in the closet, still sitting on the ottoman, her eyes red-rimmed and swollen, her face a pale, tear-streaked ruin. He didn't rush to her. He stopped in the doorway, his own face haggard, etched with a mixture of guilt and exhaustion. "Gio," he began, his voice a hoarse whisper. "I can explain." Georgina let out a sound that was half laugh, half sob. "Explain. Explain. What, Zach?" That the woman trying to send you to prison is your mistress, that you were comforting her, protecting her, right in front of the entire world, in front of me. It's not what it looks like, he said, taking a step closer. It was the classic pathetic line of every cheating husband in history. Then what is it? She shot back, her voice raw. Because what it looks like is that my entire marriage is a lie. Sabrina, she's terrified. He said his words, carefully chosen. The prosecutors are railroading her. They've threatened her with charges, threatened to ruin her life if she doesn't testify against me. They've twisted everything. I was just trying to keep her calm, to remind her to tell the truth. Georgina stared at him, searching for a flicker of sincerity, a hint of the man she had married. She found nothing but a desperate stranger. The truth. And what is that? Did you sleep with her? Zach. He hesitated. A fatal, damning pause that stretched for a heartbeat too long. It was a mistake, he finally mumbled, looking at the floor. It was a long time ago. It's over. It meant nothing. Gio, you and the baby. You are my life. She is nothing. She's not nothing. Georgina's voice rose, cracking with anguish. She's the woman who holds your entire future in her hands, and you felt the need to stroke her arm and whisper in her ear today. Did you think I wouldn't find out? Or did you just not care? Of course I care. I told you not to come. He fired back a flash of anger, cutting through his feigned remorse. I was trying to shield you from this ugliness. This is exactly what I didn't want to happen. The accusation stunned her into silence. He was blaming her. He was twisting his deceit into a misguided act of protection. He was angry that she had shown up and witnessed his betrayal, not that he had committed it in the first place. The cold, hard truth of it settled in her bones, chilling her to the marrow. The man she loved wasn't just an adulterer. He was a master manipulator. He had constructed their perfect life with the same calculated precision he used to erect his skyscrapers, and she had been his most prized, most oblivious tenant. "Get out," she whispered, the words barely audible. "What?" "Get out," she repeated, her voice gaining strength. She stood up, one hand still resting on her belly, a gesture that was no longer just protective, but defiant. "Get out of this room. Get out of this house. I need to think, and I can't do it while breathing the same air as you." Zach looked at her, his face a mixture of shock and disbelief, as if he couldn't comprehend that his charm had finally failed him. For a long moment, he seemed poised to argue, to try another tactic. But then he saw the look in her eyes, not the hurt-forgiving woman he knew, but a stranger looking at him with utter contempt. He turned without another word and left the room, his footsteps receding down the hall. Georgina stood alone in the vast closet, surrounded by the trappings of a life that was no longer hers. The shattering was complete. Now she had to figure out how to start picking up the pieces. The days that followed were a waking nightmare. The Morgan estate, once a sanctuary, became a prison of suffocating silence. Georgina moved into one of the guest suites at the far end of the house, instructing the staff that Mr. Morgan was not to enter her wing. Zach, to her surprise, complied, retreating to a hotel in the city, leaving her with the house and the deafening echo of his betrayal. His attempts to communicate were relentless. A deluge of text messages, voicemails, and extravagant floral arrangements that she had the housekeeper immediately throw away. They were all variations on the same theme. It was a mistake. She means nothing. I love you. Please let me come home and fix this. But his words were hollow, poisoned by the image seared into her brain, his hand on Sabrina Valenti's arm, his body shielding hers. It wasn't the gesture of a man ending a meaningless mistake. It was the gesture of a man with a deep, complicated, and current connection. The media was in a frenzy. The courthouse courtesan and the pregnant wife became the leading characters in a sordid public drama. Photos of her fleeing the courthouse, her face pale with shock, were splashed across tabloids and news sites. They juxtaposed them with file photos of Sabrina Valenti, sharp, ambitious, and beautiful, and flattering portraits of the golden couple in happier times. Georgina felt stripped bare, her private agony converted into public entertainment. She stopped watching the news, stopped answering her phone. The pitying calls from friends were almost worse than the silence. She felt fragile, but beneath the fragility, a hard knot of anger was beginning to form. Zach had underestimated her. He had always seen her as his beautiful, intelligent, but ultimately gentle wife, the perfect accessory to his powerful life. He had never seen the steel in her spine. 2 weeks after the courtroom incident, fueled by that burgeoning anger, Georgina made a call. Not to a divorce lawyer, not yet. Her thoughts were too jumbled for that. She called a man whose name she'd gotten from a friend who had gone through a similarly messy, high-profile split. His name was Paul Gideon, a private investigator. He wasn't cheap, and he wasn't gentle, but he was by all accounts the absolute best at digging up the truth. Gideon met her not in a shady office, but in the manicured gardens of her own estate. He was a former NYPD detective, a man in his late 50s with tired eyes that missed nothing, and a quiet demeanor that belied a relentless tenacity. Georgina, wrapped in a cashmere shawl, despite the mild autumn air, told him everything. She didn't cry. Her voice was level, almost clinical, as she recounted the events in the courtroom. He says it was a mistake, that it's over. She concluded, her gaze fixed on a distant yacht on the Sound. I don't believe him. I want to know everything. I want to know who Sabrina Valenti really is, how long it's been going on, what their connection is. I want the truth. All of it. Gideon listened without interruption, making only a few notes in a small, worn notebook. When she was finished, he looked at her directly. Mrs. Morgan, are you sure the truth in these situations is rarely clean? Once you see it, you can't unsee it. I'm 8 months pregnant, and my husband is on trial for fraud while protecting his mistress, who is also the star witness against him. Georgina replied, a bitter smile touching her lips. I think I'm past the point of worrying about things getting messy, Mr. Gideon. He gave a slight acknowledging nod. I'll start immediately. Gideon worked with terrifying efficiency. The first report came in less than 72 hours later, via a secure email. It was a preliminary background check on Sabrina Valenti. She was 34, Wharton MBA, a rising star in the cutthroat world of finance. She had started working for a subsidiary of Morgan Holdings, the one at the center of the Apex Tower project, 3 years ago. Her career trajectory had been meteoric, rising from senior analyst to chief financial officer in an unprecedentedly short time. Promotions like that don't happen without a powerful sponsor, Gideon noted dryly in the report. He included travel manifests. Zach's frequent business trips to London, Hong Kong, and Dubai over the past 2 years often coincided with trips taken by Ms. Valenti. They flew on separate commercial flights, but hotel records Gideon had managed to acquire showed them staying in the same luxury hotels, sometimes in adjacent suites, sometimes more damningly in the same penthouse. It wasn't a brief mistake. It was a long-standing international affair. The pain was sharp, a fresh stab to an already gaping wound. But it was the anger that truly fueled her, the sheer audacity of his lies. A week later, Gideon called her. "I have something you need to see in person," he said, his voice grave. "It's not just about the affair anymore." He arrived that afternoon with a slim leather briefcase. He laid out a series of documents on the polished surface of her dining room table. They were property deeds and incorporation papers. "Sabrina Valenti doesn't just work for your husband," Gideon explained, tapping a finger on a document from the Cayman Islands. "He set her up. A year ago, a shell corporation, SV Investments, purchased a penthouse apartment on Park Avenue. The purchase was all cash, $7 million. The sole director of that corporation is Ms. Valenti." He slid another document across the table. "This is more concerning. SV Investments is also a minority shareholder in 3 other shell corporations, the same ones the prosecution alleges were used to move and launder the fraudulent loan money from the Apex Tower project. Her fingerprints aren't just on the company books she was keeping as CFO. They're on the very architecture of the fraud itself." Georgina stared at the papers, the black and white text swimming before her eyes. It clicked into place with a horrifying clarity. This wasn't just an affair. Zach wasn't protecting a jilted lover he'd wronged. Sabrina Valenti wasn't some terrified employee being strong-armed by the feds. She was a co-conspirator. She was as deep in the filth as Zach was, perhaps even deeper. And Zach's behavior in the courtroom, it suddenly took on a terrifying new meaning. The protective gesture, the whispered words, he wasn't trying to calm a frightened ex-lover. He was trying to control a co-defendant. He was managing his accomplice. He was protecting himself. His display of concern for Sabrina wasn't about her at all. It was about ensuring she stuck to whatever story they had concocted, ensuring she didn't flip on him completely and drag him down into the abyss with her. He hadn't just cheated on Georgina. He had made her a fool on a scale she could scarcely comprehend. While she had been at home picking out colors for the nursery and believing in his innocence, he had been engaged in a criminal conspiracy with his mistress. He had built his empire on lies, and his marriage, it seemed, was no different. Georgina stood up and walked to the large window overlooking the water. The serene view was unchanged, but her world had been irrevocably altered. The grief was still there, a heavy anchor in her chest. But now it was joined by something else, something cold and hard and clear. Resolve. Zach Morgan hadn't just broken her heart. He had insulted her intelligence. He had used her pregnancy, and her public dignity as a shield for his own sordid crimes. He thought she was a fragile doll to be kept in a gilded cage. He was about to find out how wrong he was. The next time Zach called, Georgina answered. Her voice was devoid of emotion, a calm, flat surface on a sea of rage. "I need to see you, Zach. At the house. Tonight. Come alone." She could hear the relief in his voice, the arrogant assumption that she was finally ready to be placated. "Of course, Gio. Anything. I'll be there at 7. She spent the afternoon preparing. She had Gideon's entire file printed and arranged in a neat stack on the coffee table in the formal living room, a room they rarely used, which felt appropriate. It was a cold, impersonal space, fit for a cold, impersonal reckoning. She dressed not in the soft, flowing maternity wear he was used to, but in a structured black dress, her hair pulled back severely. When the doorbell rang at precisely 7, she was ready. Zach entered, looking penitent, holding a single white orchid. He stopped when he saw her expression. The hopeful, apologetic look on his face faltered. "Gio, you look—" "Don't—" She cut him off, her voice like ice. "Sit down." He sat warily on the edge of a silk sofa, placing the orchid on the table beside the damning pile of documents. "I know you think I'm a fool, Zach," she began, remaining standing. "I know you think I'm just the heartbroken wife who can be won back with apologies and expensive flowers. You've been lying to me for years, not just about the affair, about everything." She picked up the first document, the hotel records from his business trips with Sabrina. A mistake. A long time ago, Dubai 6 months ago, Hong Kong 8 months ago, the penthouse suite at the Connaught in London a year ago. Mistake after mistake after mistake, Zach. For years. His face paled. "Gio, it was complicated." "Oh, it's much more complicated than that," she said, her voice dripping with sarcasm. She tossed the hotel records onto his lap and picked up the next file. "Let's talk about Sabrina's $7 million Park Avenue apartment, the one purchased for her in cash by a shell corporation you funded. Was that a going-away present for the mistress you insisted meant nothing to you?" Zach flinched as if struck. He stared at the papers, then back at her, his eyes wide with a new kind of fear. This wasn't the emotional argument he had prepared for. This was an ambush. "Where did you get this? That doesn't matter." Georgina snapped her control, beginning to fray. She threw the final stack of papers onto the table, the incorporation documents, linking Sabrina Valenti to the fraudulent shell companies. "What matters is this. You didn't just have an affair, you son of a bitch. You had a partner, a criminal partner. You put her at the center of your filthy little scheme, and now you stand in court, pretending to protect the frightened witness, when what you are really doing is managing your accomplice." The accusation hung in the air, undeniable and ugly. Zach's carefully constructed facade crumbled, completely replaced by the raw panic of a cornered animal. "You don't understand the pressure I was under." He burst out, rising to his feet. The deal was falling apart. It was either this or bankruptcy. Everything we have, this house, our life, it was all on the line. Our life. She laughed, a harsh, bitter sound. "There is no our life, Zach. There is the life you live and the stage play you directed for me. You used me. You used our marriage, our unborn son. You stood in that courtroom and humiliated me in front of the entire world, not out of love for her, but to save your own skin. You were worried she'd flip on you and tell the whole truth, weren't you?" He had no answer. His silence was her confirmation. "I am done," she said, her voice dropping to a low, dangerous whisper. "I am done being your alibi. I am done being your prop. And I am done being your wife." "Georgina, no," he pleaded, his bravado gone, replaced by desperation. "We can fix this. I'll give her up. I'll do anything. Think of the baby." "Oh, I am thinking of him," she said, her hand going to her belly. "I am thinking about how he will not be raised by a liar, a cheat and a criminal. He will be raised by a mother who respects herself enough to walk away from this toxic charade." She walked to the door and opened it. "My lawyer will be in touch with yours tomorrow morning. Get out of my house." Zach stared at her, his empire collapsing around him in the cold, formal living room. He had lost control of the narrative, and in doing so he had lost everything that mattered. He walked out without another word, the white orchid lying abandoned on the table, a pathetic symbol of a love that had never really been true. The next morning, Georgina did not call a standard-issue divorce attorney from a glossy firm. She called the one name that struck fear into the hearts of Manhattan's wealthiest philanderers, Diana Kendrick. Diana was a legend, a woman in her 60s with razor-sharp intelligence and a reputation for eviscerating powerful men in court. Her office overlooking Central Park was sleek, modern, and intimidating. Georgina laid out the entire story, including Gideon's file. Diana listened intently, her steepled fingers pressed to her lips. She didn't offer sympathy. She offered strategy. "Your husband's position is extraordinarily weak," Diana said, her voice crisp and clear. "He's facing federal prison time, his assets are about to be scrutinized by the government, and his key witness is his mistress and co-conspirator. This is a gift, Georgina." "A gift?" Georgina asked, bewildered. "Leverage," Diana corrected. "In a typical divorce, we'd fight over assets. Here we hold the keys to his future. He is desperate to control Sabrina Valenti's testimony. He is terrified of what else she might know, and what else she might say to the prosecution to save herself. And you now have a direct line to his greatest vulnerability." A slow, audacious idea began to form in Diana's eyes. "He thinks this is a two-player game, him versus the government. He's forgotten about the third player on the board, the one he discarded." Diana leaned forward, her expression intense. "The media has painted you as the victim, the poor, pregnant wife. It's a powerful position, but we are not going to play the victim. We are going to use the truth you've uncovered, not just to secure your future in a divorce settlement, but to control the outcome of this entire mess." For the first time in weeks, Georgina felt a flicker of something other than pain or anger. It was power. Zach had built his life on the assumption that she was a beautiful passive object in his collection. He and the rest of the world were about to see the woman she truly was. The awakening was over. The fight was about to begin. The plan Diana Kendrick proposed was both terrifying and brilliant. It moved beyond the realm of divorce court and into the high-stakes chess game of Zach's criminal trial. "Your husband's greatest fear," Diana had explained, "is that Sabrina Valenti will realize her loyalty to him is a one-way ticket to a federal prison cell. He is using their shared history to manipulate her to keep her on a leash. We need to cut that leash." "How?" Georgina had asked. "You are going to talk to her," Diana stated simply. The idea was abhorrent. Meeting the woman who had shared her husband's bed, who had helped him betray her on every conceivable level, felt like swallowing glass. Yet the strategic genius of it was undeniable. Georgina and Sabrina were the two women Zach was trying to play against each other, assuming they would be blinded by jealousy and rivalry. He would never in his wildest, most arrogant dreams conceive of them communicating, let alone cooperating. Finding Sabrina was the easy part. Paul Gideon tracked her to a corporate rental in a nondescript Tribeca building, a temporary home since her own penthouse had become a piece of evidence. Getting her to agree to a meeting was the challenge. Georgina didn't use lawyers or intermediaries. She sent a simple, hand-delivered note. "Ms. Valenti, I know what he promised you, and I know what he is threatening you with. He is playing us both. We should talk. Alone. GAM." The calculated risk paid off. 2 days later, a text message appeared on a new encrypted phone Diana had provided. A time and a place. A small private room at a discreet hotel in Midtown. Georgina arrived first, her heart pounding against her ribs. She felt her son kick a small, reassuring presence. She was doing this for him, for their future. When Sabrina Valenti walked in, She looked smaller and more worn than she had in the courtroom. The sharp, ambitious armor was gone, replaced by a deep-set exhaustion and a palpable fear. She clutched a Chanel handbag like a shield. For a long moment, they simply stared at each other across the small table, the two poles of Zach Morgan's life, two women who should have been mortal enemies. It was Georgina who spoke first, her voice steady. "Thank you for coming." Sabrina gave a short, mirthless laugh. "I'm not sure if I'm brave or just incredibly stupid. His lawyers told me not to speak to anyone, especially not you." "His lawyers are trying to protect him, not you," Georgina stated flatly. She pushed a single piece of paper across the table. It was a copy of the deed to Sabrina's Park Avenue apartment, purchased by the Shell Corporation. "He bought you a $7 million cage, Ms. Valenti, and now the feds have the key." Sabrina glanced at the paper, her composure cracking. "What do you want?" "I want you to understand the game you're in," Georgina said, leaning forward. "Zach doesn't love you. He owns you. That apartment, your promotion, your career, it was all a transaction. And right now, in that courtroom, he's not protecting you from the government. He's protecting himself from you. He's making sure you stick to the story that minimizes his role and makes you look like the primary architect of the fraud." Sabrina's face, already pale, lost all its color. "That's not true. He said they're pressuring me because I'm the weaker target, that if we stick together, his lawyers can get us both through this." "And what happens if you don't stick together?" Georgina pressed. "What did he say he would do? I imagine he has evidence of your involvement. Things he could leak to the prosecution to make you look even more guilty. I imagine he's threatened to ruin you completely, to make sure you take the fall alone." The flicker of recognition in Sabrina's eyes was all the confirmation Georgina needed. Her instincts, honed by years of living with a master manipulator, had been right. Tears welled in Sabrina's eyes, tears of fear and fury. "He said he loved me," she whispered the words, sounding pathetic even to her own ears. "For 3 years he sold me a dream, a partnership, a future. He told me Georgina was just for show, a society wife he was trapped with. And then, when the indictment came down, everything changed. He became cold calculating. He told me exactly what I had to say, what documents to forget. He said if I deviated by a single word, he would bury me." The story was a poisoned dart, yet hearing it, Georgina felt a strange, unexpected shift. The fiery jealousy she expected to feel was replaced by a cold, clarifying pity. They were different, yes, but they were both victims of the same man's pathological narcissism. He had sold them both a carefully curated fantasy, one as the perfect wife, the other as the secret soulmate. Both were lies. "He told me you were cold," Sabrina continued, her voice thick with emotion. "That your marriage was a business arrangement, seeing you in that courtroom. Pregnant? I realized I was the fool, the biggest fool in New York City." "We both were," Georgina said quietly. "But we don't have to be anymore. His entire strategy hinges on us hating each other. It hinges on the jury seeing a scorned mistress trying to get revenge and a loyal wife standing by her man. He never imagined a world where we would be in the same room comparing notes." A dangerous, fragile alliance began to form in the sterile hotel room. It wasn't about friendship or forgiveness. It was about survival. Georgina explained Diana Kendrick's strategy. Sabrina had the inside knowledge, the real unvarnished truth of the fraud, the location of hidden servers, the existence of documents Zach thought were long destroyed. Georgina had the public sympathy, and the legal firepower. The prosecution thinks they have a strong case, Georgina explained, but they don't have everything. Zach is still holding cards back. You can give them the whole deck, Sabrina. You can go back to the U.S. attorney, tell them you were previously testifying under duress, and offer them full cooperation in exchange for a better deal. A much better deal. He'll destroy me. Sabrina breathed, the fear still potent. He will try, Georgina countered. His lawyers will try to paint you as a liar, a jilted lover changing her story. But they won't be expecting me. She looked Sabrina directly in the eye. When you get back on that stand and tell the real story, I will be sitting in the front row of that courtroom. Not as the broken, humiliated wife, but as the woman who knows you are telling the truth. My presence will corroborate your story in a way no document ever could. The scorned mistress narrative dies the second the wronged wife sits there silently validating her testimony. We will destroy him together. It was a breathtaking gamble. For Sabrina, it meant trusting the woman she had wronged. For Georgina, it meant aligning herself with her husband's mistress. It was an unholy alliance, born of shared betrayal. Sabrina was silent for a full minute, the weight of the decision pressing down on her. Finally, she looked up. The tears gone replaced by the same hard resolve Georgina now felt in her own heart. Tell me what I need to do, Sabrina Valenti said. The shift in the trial was immediate and seismic. 2 days after her secret meeting with Georgina Sabrina Valenti's lawyer informed the court that his client had new information to provide. The U.S. Attorney's Office, sensing a major breakthrough, requested a 3-day recess. Behind closed doors, Sabrina, now protected by a new, fiercer legal team, funded discreetly by a trust Diana Kendrick had established, laid everything bare. She provided passwords to offshore accounts, detailed ledgers of the money laundering scheme, and described conversations with Zach that proved he was not a distant overseer, but the meticulous architect of the entire fraud. She handed them the murder weapon, and Zach Morgan's fingerprints were all over it. The prosecution, ecstatic, granted her a revised plea deal, full truthful testimony, in exchange for a recommendation of probation and community service. The prey had turned on the predator. When the trial resumed, the atmosphere in the courtroom was electric. The press gallery was overflowing. Zach Morgan sat at the defense table, flanked by his lawyers, but the confident swagger was gone. He looked thin, tense, and he kept shooting venomous looks at the prosecution's table, where Sabrina sat, waiting her face a calm, unreadable mask. But the real shock for Zach came when he looked at the gallery. There in the front row, directly in his line of sight, sat his wife. Georgina was the picture of serene strength. She was dressed in a simple, elegant, cream-colored dress that accentuated her pregnancy. She wasn't weeping. She wasn't glaring. She met his gaze with a cool, level stare that communicated one simple, devastating message: I know everything. His face went ashen. His lawyer, Robert Peterson, leaned over and whispered something, but Zach didn't seem to hear him. He understood in that horrifying moment that he had been outmaneuvered. The 2 women in his life he had sought to control were now united against him, a pincer movement he had never anticipated. Prosecutor Henderson recalled Sabrina Valenti to the stand. Ms. Valenti, he began, you are still under oath. I would like to direct your attention to your previous testimony regarding the Apex Tower financing. Is there anything you would like to clarify or amend? Yes, Sabrina said, her voice clear and strong. I would like to amend all of it. I was previously testifying under duress, following a script provided to me by the defendant, Zach Morgan. A wave of murmurs swept the courtroom. The judge banged his gavel for order. For the next 6 hours, Sabrina meticulously deconstructed Zach's empire of lies. With Henderson guiding her, she detailed how Zach had personally instructed her to create the shell corporations, how he had dictated the fraudulent figures on the loan applications, and how he had coached her on what to say if they ever got caught. She produced emails from a private server, the location of which she had given the feds, that showed Zach's explicit instructions. Robert Peterson's cross-examination was brutal. He was a skilled lawyer, and he went for the jugular. "Ms. Valenti, isn't it true that you were engaged in a long-term intimate relationship with my client?" Peterson sneered. "Yes," Sabrina answered calmly. "And isn't it true that this relationship ended shortly before the indictment came down? It is true that he became distant and controlling." "Yes." "So a woman scorned," Peterson declared, turning to the jury. "Isn't this the truth of the matter? Mr. Morgan ended your affair, and now you are concocting this elaborate fantasy to destroy him. You're changing your story to get revenge." It was the exact line of attack Georgina and Diana had predicted. But as Peterson spoke, Sabrina didn't look at him. She looked for a brief, intentional moment at Georgina. Georgina met her gaze and gave a small, almost imperceptible nod. The jury saw it. The press saw it. This wasn't the behavior of two rivals. It was a confirmation. Henderson, on his redirect, drove the point home. "Mr. Peterson claims you are motivated by revenge. But can you tell the court who is sitting in the front row today, listening to your testimony?" Sabrina looked toward the gallery. "Georgina Morgan, his wife. And has Mrs. Morgan been here for the duration of your new testimony?" "Yes." "Does she appear to be supporting her husband's claim that you are a liar?" Henderson asked, treading a fine line. Peterson shot to his feet. "Objection. Calls for speculation on the witness's part about a spectator's state of mind." "Sustained," the judge said. "The jury will disregard the question. But," he added, looking over his glasses at the jury box, "they will not be instructed to disregard who is and who is not present in this courtroom." The damage was done. The image was more powerful than any testimony. The loyal wife was not standing by her man. She was sitting in silent solidarity with the mistress who was telling the truth. The narrative of the scorned lover had been utterly neutralized. The final blow came when Henderson introduced evidence of the $7 million Park Avenue penthouse. "Ms. Valenti, can you tell the court the source of the funds for this property?" "It was a bonus," Sabrina said, her voice laced with irony, "for services rendered on the Apex project. It was a payment from Zach Morgan, funneled through the same shell corporations used in the fraud to ensure my silence and loyalty." The prosecution then showed wire transfers in corporation papers. All the evidence Paul Gideon had uncovered for Georgina now deployed with devastating effect in a federal court. Zach Morgan sat slumped in his chair, a broken man. He didn't look at his wife or his former mistress. He stared blankly at the defense table, at the ruins of a life built on the fatal miscalculation that the women he betrayed were as weak as he believed them to be. Georgina had not uttered a single word in court, yet her presence had been the queen on the chessboard, a silent, powerful move that had led to an undeniable checkmate. The jury took less than a day. The verdict was a clean sweep, guilty on all counts: wire fraud, conspiracy, money laundering. Zach Morgan, the titan of industry, stood pale and slack-jawed as his fate was read aloud. He was taken into custody immediately pending sentencing, his bespoke suit looking absurdly out of place as federal marshals led him from the courtroom he had once commanded. Georgina watched him go, not with triumph, but with a profound and weary sense of closure. She felt no joy in his destruction, only a grim satisfaction that the truth had finally prevailed. As the courtroom emptied, she caught Sabrina's eye from across the room. There were no words exchanged, no smiles. There was only a quiet, shared nod of understanding. They were not friends, and never would be. They were survivors of the same shipwreck, forever linked by the storm they had weathered together. Sabrina would face her own sentencing, but with the government's recommendation, she would walk away with her freedom, if not her reputation, intact. It was a steeper price than Georgina had to pay, a fact that tempered any sense of victory. The divorce proceedings handled by Diana Kendrick were swift and brutal. With Zach's criminal conviction and the overwhelming evidence of financial fraud and marital infidelity, including hidden assets that Sabrina's information had helped uncover, he had no leverage. His legal team, facing a mountain of irrefutable proof, advised him to settle quickly to avoid further public humiliation and a more punitive judgment. Georgina did not ask for half of his tainted empire. Diana structured a settlement that was both strategic and just. A significant but clean portion of Zach's remaining legitimate assets was placed into an irrevocable trust for their son. The Greenwich estate was sold, as were the cars, the jet, and the art collection. Georgina wanted no remnants of that life. She took enough to secure her and her child's future, comfortably severing all financial ties to the Morgan name and its criminal legacy. A month later, in the quiet, sterile environment of a private hospital room, Georgina gave birth to a healthy baby boy. She named him Nicholas, a name with no connection to the Morgan dynasty. Holding him for the first time, she felt the last vestiges of the anger and betrayal wash away, replaced by an overwhelming, fierce love. This tiny, perfect child was her future. He was her true north. Her life was quieter now. She bought a charming brownstone in Brooklyn, a world away from the cold grandeur of Greenwich. She reconnected with her passion for art history, taking a position curating a small but respected gallery. Her days were filled with the simple, tangible joys of motherhood, the scent of baby powder, the warmth of a small body curled against hers, the sound of soft gurgles and first laughs. The media eventually moved on to the next scandal. Zach Morgan was sentenced to 12 years in a federal penitentiary, a fallen king in a kingdom of his own making. His name became a cautionary tale whispered in boardrooms and on golf courses. One crisp spring afternoon, about a year after the trial, Georgina was pushing Nicholas in his stroller through Prospect Park. The cherry blossoms were in full bloom, painting the sky in soft shades of pink. She saw a woman sitting on a bench ahead reading a book. As she drew closer, she recognized the sharp, dark hair. It was Sabrina Valenti. Sabrina looked up, her eyes widening in surprise. She had changed. The severe business suits were gone, replaced by jeans and a simple sweater. She looked softer, calmer. Georgina paused, an unspoken question hanging in the air between them. Sabrina closed her book and gave a small, hesitant smile. Her eyes drifted down to Nicholas, who was babbling happily in his stroller. "He's beautiful, Georgina," Sabrina said, her voice quiet. "Thank you," Georgina replied. There was no talk of the past, no need to rehash the pain and the betrayal. The silence between them wasn't awkward, but filled with a shared unspoken history. They were two women whose lives had been irrevocably altered by the same man who had found strength not in vengeance, but in an alliance born of necessity and a mutual refusal to remain victims. I'm going back to school," Sabrina offered, as if needing to fill the silence. Architectural history. Starting over. Georgina nodded, a genuine smile touching her lips for the first time. I wish you the best, Sabrina. Truly. You too, Georgina, she said. And with that, Georgina pushed the stroller onward, walking away from the bench, away from the past, and into the warm, sunlit path of her new life. She was not the broken, pregnant wife who had walked into a courtroom. She was Georgina Adler, a mother, a curator, a survivor. She was free. The story of Georgina Adler isn't just about a marriage falling apart. It's a powerful reminder of how quickly a perfect life can reveal itself to be a perfect lie. It's about the incredible resilience of a woman who, at her most vulnerable, discovered a strength she never knew she had. Faced with public humiliation and private agony, she refused to be a victim. Instead, she rewrote the entire script, not with revenge, but with intelligence, courage, and a shocking alliance that no one saw coming. What did you think of Georgina's decision to work with Sabrina? Was it a brilliant strategic move or a betrayal of her own self-respect? Let us know your thoughts in the comments below. If stories of strength and resilience in the face of impossible odds inspire you, please hit that like button. Share this video with someone who needs to hear it, and make sure you subscribe to our channel for more real-life dramas that you won't forget. Thank you for listening.